Thank you so much for joining today. Sorry about the technical issues, and we're going to be talking about artificial intelligence and machine learning and how it can and is and would be used in a fundraising context. This is a very quick overview. Feel free to jump in with tests that you've done, thoughts that you've had, prompts that have worked for you, that sort of thing. So what is artificial intelligence and machine learning? It's computer systems that are set up to do things that would normally require human intelligence. It used to be that folks would say, oh, the measure of artificial intelligence is, can it effectively simulate a human? A lot of folks if you've seen The Imitation Game or know about Alan Turing or those sorts of things, he posited if you put a machine in one room and a human in the other and an outside observer can't tell, doesn't know who's in which room, that is a true artificial intelligence. And we have a note in the chat. I played with it, found it flexible in responding to specific prompts, but very soulless, good for summaries. But to summarize this and found it leaves out the bits of the article that would make it useful. Absolutely, I found that same thing. I said, summarize one of our webinars, trying to get it to do the outline. And the first two bullet points was, this is the name of the webinar, and this is the presenter of that. And it's like, well, that's the part I knew. So very high level and not into it's not necessarily good at finding takeaways on those sorts of things. So we'll talk a little bit about prompts that may be useful. Summaries, it's pretty good at, but only to get down to like the few sentence version. And one of the aspects of so the Turing test is great, but a lot of people say we've gone beyond that, where we may not want to measure artificial intelligence by humans, because in some things it's going to be much better than, in some cases it's not going to get there. And the analogy I use is, if you pictured that the sea levels on Earth are slowly rising, being able to replicate like a BuzzFeed article that already sounded like it came from an AI, that's at beach level, and it's probably already underwater. BuzzFeed has said, we're going to generate quizzes using AI now. But those types of emotive tasks, those types of caring tasks, those are on the highest mountains, and those will be the toughest to take away. So you can achieve this in multiple different ways. Machine learning is one of those things, and it's this sort of learning recursive process where you give a goal. There's structured machine learning where you put in and teach it, this is what a cat looks like. You categorize, these are cats, these are non-cats, and it learns on that. Unstructured is, you don't give it any of that. And so AlphaGo, which was Google's first machine that learned Go, doesn't know it's the best Go player in the world, and it doesn't realize it's playing a game. It's just trying to optimize for what it's seeing on the board, and doesn't know that it's winning, that sort of thing. So it's trying to replace or enhance human cognition. I would emphasize the enhance for right now. What are the things that we can do with it that will help us? And so I've broken this into two segments. Can it help us with audience building? Who should get a mail piece? Who should get an ad? Those sorts of things. And then into the creative side, the more generative side. So can it predict the best audience? It already has been. Humans looking at things like RFM analyses are pretty suboptimal and have been for a while. And so in 2010, they looked at modeled ask strings instead of, well, I can just use a human and I can use HPC and do 50% above, 100% above. They said, look, if we do just very basic modeling, we're not even rounding, not even those sorts of things, we can increase average gift and response rate significantly. And that was using 2010 data and techniques. Things have gotten a lot better since then in terms of algorithms and in terms of processing power. So that's what am I putting in the ask string, but how about who gets what mail piece? And so they looked at machine learning for a 2014 and into 2015 fundraiser for the Catholic Church in the German urban area. They did testing And the premium testing is very much like what you've seen on other discussions on our testing roundtable here. Putting a premium in, does it help? Does it hurt? And then who should get the male piece? And they looked at warm donors, they looked at cold donors. Obviously, the cold list was a little bit higher. And the male pieces were very much like what you'd see here in the United States. In fact, one of our divisions produces these types of cards. And I should specify here that I'm intentionally trying to give non-more examples. I don't want to talk our own book. So trying to go to the literature here. So instead of, a lot of tests are, can we get away with not having this premium? A lot of this test is, can we put a premium in and boost response rate? So the data that they put into the machine learning system are socioeconomic characteristics, donation history, and then interestingly, in my mind, a bunch of stuff from Google Maps. How many restaurants are nearby, supermarkets, medical facilities, how close are you to the central train station, how close are you to the city hall, and how elevated are you? And the reason that they did this is not because they're really interested in elevation all that much, but these are really good proxies for economic status and income, and they're publicly available. You can look up someone's address and get all of these right now using a Google Maps plugin, essentially. And so they said, this is something that's available to charities. We want to use only things that folks would be able to use, not any sort of special data coming in. So first, let's look at the premium results. You can see on the worm list, the premium did bump up the average giving here. But if you look at net of costs, not much change from what you have going in. 0.8 euros. These are 3 different models, 2 linear models, and then the third one, the AIPW here, is your machine learning algorithm. So all 3 basically say, yes, there's an impact on including these premiums in there, but no, it doesn't pay for itself among current donors. And then the cold list, yes, bump in response rate, bump in giving, but not nearly enough to recover the costs of it. So that's what they found there. They didn't find that the gift boosted net results or hurt net results. Cold list, uniformly significant loss if you include these cards in. But the interesting part is looking at this worm list graph over here, you can see that if you sort people by the amount that they needed that premium in order to give, about half of people paid for themselves with the premium and about half did not. Or that's that red line that you see there. In the cold list, very few people, even among those who gave, was the premium helpful. It's an expensive premium. It was a €1 premium, essentially. 1.16 euro, actually, it says here in the thing. I think at rollout, it was 9.97. Anyway, so where does machine learning come in, and why are you talking about this, Nick? They said, okay, instead of that, using previous results and nothing going forward, can we predict who should get this additional investment? They're not looking at, and we've talked about more sophisticated modeling to say who's a premium donor, who's a non-premium donor. You should be able to go to your co-op partner or your modeling partner or whoever that is and say, give me people who are premium responsive, and hopefully they have models that should be able to do this. This isn't that fancy. This is the totally non-fancy version of it to say just who merits additional investment. And so machine learning said, oh, let's take a third of the people approximately and model for who should get that gift. And over in the column 1, you can see the 3 stars mean highly statistically significant. The net donation amount, the donation probability, and the donation amount and probability in future years all go up significantly when you model who should be getting the additional investment. So if you did this quote unquote optimal targeting, and we know this isn't optimal, that there are other variables that you could put in there that would benefit the model but aren't in there. You can increase the average donation 14% higher than if everyone received the increase 17% if no one receives the gift. And you increase by 14% higher than if the gift was assigned randomly. Since the gift didn't have a significant impact, it's not surprising that there's not much difference among those, but a 14% increase off of machine learning for who should get the premium. In addition, the researchers were just trying to optimize those gifts in year one, but there was also a 5% increase, a 3 percentage point, 5% increase in year two retention. So these people, if they got the optimal targeting, were more likely to give next year, even when there was no treatment applied. And so we looked at the 3 different things that they put into the system. So that's socioeconomic characteristics, donation history, and Google Maps. Interestingly, there was no benefit from including the socioeconomic data in the model. It was all location, location, location. And it was also some of those other factors that went in there. Socioeconomic was hardly relevant to the model. They were able to take it out. So all of that's interesting. Another point that I want to raise is I want to share the abstract from this article because it's why, in my opinion, research is too important to leave to just the researchers. They framed this as how nonprofits are spending suboptimally. We should be using machine learning models to say only go to past donors, never address people who were previously active, never donated, because they were looking to say, who is going to have donations that exceed solicitation costs? And all of us would look at this and say, that is complete and utter bull. Where do you think people who gave past donations came from? You know, people were not born donors to the Catholic Church in this case. And so, of course, you're going to have investment in people who are below what those costs are to get them to renew their lap support or to get them to acquire to the organization. And so we conclude that charities not engaging in optimal targeting waste significant resources. I conclude that your abstract is derogatory to the actual business of fundraising and has a fundamental misunderstanding of what we do as a sector and what is important. And honestly, economics entirely, because obviously in the for-profit sector, people acquire to get customers, or people invest to get customers also. So great study, weird abstract, and doesn't really fit the sector. Any questions on that? So this is something that used 2014 machine learning, used pretty basic targeting criteria and data. Maybe they let ChatGPT write the abstract. Yes, but I've actually gone to the Science and Philanthropy Conference, and it is a really interesting mix of folks. It's mostly researchers. And one of the things that you will see people arguing 2 points fervently in the same presentation. One of them is absolutely we shouldn't be using the amount that some these overhead variables to measure the effectiveness of charities. That being said, it's what we have. So look at our research study that uses overhead percentage as the measure of effectiveness, and therefore charities shouldn't be spending in this way. And so it's a real kind of myopia for some in the research community. And so just like I would advocate for a human AI hybrid in terms of how we go to market, you don't want to take humans completely out of the loop. You don't want to turn things over entirely to AI. Same thing with researchers. Like, you need practitioners in the room to say, this is not the way we look at fundraising, nor is it the way you should be looking at fundraising. Although, good study, important to learn about how machine learning can be more effective. So this doesn't have any sort of co-op data in it. This doesn't have any sort of advanced third-party data in it. And so we know that these models can likely be richer using the things that are at hand right now. And we're certainly seeing these results for a lot of our clients. It's so effective that a guy writing a a person, I do not, I believe the person identifies as male, I'm not sure. So a person did their master's thesis now 13 years ago, and using the AI ML techniques of the time, and in fact, using the statistical models of the time. And one of the things that he or she talks about in the master's thesis is, hey, R keeps crashing, and so I can't do all of the things that I want to do here. So limited in its scope. But there's this corpus of a decade's worth of direct mail results. There's a pause period, and then they say, here are October, December mailings that you can't see. Let's use a portion of what happened as training data and see if you can predict these October to December results. Variables were pretty basic things, transactional variables, some very limited demographics like zip, sex, state. And they looked at regression analysis, kind of the statistical model coming in versus a machine learning model. And so what you're trying to do in these sorts of models is the ideal sort of decile system. What you'd be able to do is go in and say, everyone in the first 3 deciles donated, no one in the bottom 7 deciles donated. You are talking to the ideal group of people. Now, we don't live in an ideal world, obviously, but failing that, you're looking for, obviously, the people who perform in 1 performed better than 2, performed better than 3, and so on down the line. And you want as few people in the bottom donating who you'd say, oh gosh, these are the 10% who are least likely to donate. And you want the people in decile 1 where you're like, we are pretty darn confident these people are going to donate. You want a lot of those people donating. So let's look at regression analysis versus machine learning. Pretty effective. Regression doesn't do a horrible job, but you can see over on the right, revenues from in that top decile, better among the machine learning. And then at the bottom, if you said, let's take out the decile, the 10% of people who are least likely to donate in either of these models, you'd lose $5,700. If you're using regression analysis, you'd lose $4,500 if you're taking out those from machine learning. So uniformly, machine learning does better at predicting who's going to donate. If you're looking at just the top 10%, you have almost a 6% outperform, and it gets down from there, but in every decile, you're doing better at predicting who's going to jump. Thanks, Tina. For those who do need to leave early, I know we are going long today because of our technical difficulties. We will be recording this, and hope you're able to catch that part of it. So machine learning is better. Why is it better? Well, regression analysis was made 200 years ago, and you're using statistical models from when toilet was actually hole in ground. So there are more effective techniques now, and some of the reasons for that is that a lot of things are multi-directional. You've probably all heard the old saw that the lower the grade level reading requirement to read a fundraising letter, the better off you are. And that is absolutely true. You don't want a college level letter that is hard to read, causes cognitive load, turns people off. But there's a point at which it gets too simple. Otherwise, we'd all send out Hop on Pop and Green Eggs and Ham as our fundraising letter. There's kind of a minimum of ask and a minimum of explanation that is necessary to make the letter effective. So there's a sweet spot, a Goldilocks spot. A lot of people say around the 4th grade reading level. I would say, hey, let's let more statistical models look at it, but that's probably a pretty good rule of thumb. But it's multi-directional. There's a sweet spot. Same thing for age. We've talked about in previous testing roundtables that after about the age of 70, giving tends to trail off. as people's health and connection to their community tends to get worse on average. That age is different, I'm guessing, for every person. But in the aggregate, that's what you're looking at. And so if you say the older someone gets, the better donor they're going to be, it misses that trail off. And the thing that I always say is that those types of models will predict that the most philanthropic day that you will have is the day before you die. And we know that that's not the case. So there's this multi-directionality. There's also nonlinearity, which is kind of a fancy way of saying, with a linear model, if one thing goes up by 1 and the other goes up by 2, you would expect if it goes up by 2, the other one would go up by 4, that sort of thing. Straight line going through it. However, with things like, with things like donor satisfaction, you don't have that sort of linearity. And the way that I put it is, think about if you went to your hotel room. A monovalent dissatisfier is, does the toilet work? You are not extra satisfied when the toilet works. You're just dissatisfied when it doesn't. On the flip side, there are monovalent satisfiers. If there are chocolates on the pillow or a free gift basket when I check into my hotel room, I'm not expecting that. My satisfaction doesn't go down when I don't have it, but when I do, my satisfaction goes up. There's the capacity to delight. And so there are things like that in satisfaction for donors. If you don't send out a thank you or a acknowledgement of any type, that's a monovalent dissatisfier. People aren't thrilled that you sent them the acknowledgement letter. They, may get a little satisfaction out about it, but they are definitely not happy if you don't. Whereas sort of surprise gifts and those sorts of things are monovalent satisfiers. You don't need them or expect them, but they're nice. They surprise to the positive. Comment? Machine learning also has the advantage of learning. A regression analysis can't iterate. It can't learn from new results coming in. Oh, I predicted the world would be this way. It's actually that way. And I can change my model to better accommodate that. And then also the effects that we see. A machine learning model will say, if A is good and B is good, then A plus B is going to be twice as good. And it's usually a good assumption. But I think of it like I used to live at this apartment complex where when we had a small child and 2 small dogs, and they said for our lawns, rain is good and sprinklers are good. And rain and sprinklers together are great. At 2 a.m., we're going to water the lawn, rain or shine. Now, we lived there during monsoon season, apparently, and our dogs wanted to vacate their bladders at 2:10 in the morning, and the sprinklers went on at 2. So I would go outside. I was drenched from above and below by the sprinklers and by the rain, waiting for a Chihuahua and a mutt to do their business. And I swore I would get revenge on that linear thinking. And apparently that still wrinkles me because it was like 16 years ago. That type of intersectionality, in fact, intersectionality is a good term for it. Kimberly Crenshaw in the DEI space talks about how the privilege that one can get from intersecting sex, gender, sexual orientation, those sorts of categories, and the discrimination one can face from intersecting categories is different. That the challenges that an African-American woman would face are not the same as what an African-American man plus a white woman would face. And we see that in the charitable sector, that these intersections aren't always predictive. Married couples are most likely to volunteer, followed by single women, followed by single men. In every ethnic group against Asian Americans, where single men are the most likely to volunteer. Marital status dramatically changes giving across gender. And so the intersection of are you married changes men and changes with women, but it changes them in opposite directions. At the intersection of faith and gender, religious attendance significantly increases men's giving, but not women's. And so when you do these sorts of regression analysis, you're not able to look at these more complex interactions. So machine learning, better than our usual prediction methods. Any questions on that before I get into the more generative AI and the more exciting and modern and ChatGPT and DALL-E and Midjourney and all of that sort of thing? Feel free to put them in the chat or come off mute and ask any questions you have. Okay, hearing none, I will plow ahead. Can AI predict the best donor communication? So this is a more test, I will confess that. This is one that our teams said, hey, we have this corpus of ads. We know the results from them. AI doesn't. So let's put it into Genus AI, let's put it into Bard AI, and ask it which of these ads will perform best. And can we use this to see what would be the best options for ads? In a word, no. In fact, those of you who are Seinfeld fans know about the Costanza method. Like, do the opposite. I'm just going to do the opposite of whatever I thought my instincts say to do, and that'll get better results. That's what you should do with Bard, apparently, across these two sets. Because the ad that Bard predicted as the worst ad in both campaigns turned out to be the best ad in front of actual people. And so this repair home ads, for example, it said that ad is cluttered and the message is not very clear. The visuals are also not very engaging. Best ad in actual performance. Genus AI did a little bit better and only had the best ad as the worst ad in one of the two areas, but in neither condition did they get the best ad right, and mostly got it very, very, very wrong. So why is that? Those of you who have heard me talk about AI and machine learning before have heard me say that AI is, if you ask AI to produce a letter, it will produce the most letter that ever lettered. You know, it is trying to optimize for sameness. And so Kathy put into the chat earlier to say that it felt soulless. And it's in part because it's using this corpus of all of the letters that have ever been. And so it's trying to predict what the next word, what the next phrase is going to be coming up, just like your phone does with smart kind of autocorrect and with here's the next word that you're probably going to be texting. But ChatGPT has the benefit of the entire question at once. And so it's going to spit out for you largely what the most common following words are going to be. And about 80% of the time, they'll use the most common word, and about 20% of the time, they'll go on a different route to make things a little bit different, to be non-deterministic is the term that they're using. And so two people can put in the same prompt. In fact, you can put in the same prompt today and tomorrow, and you'll get different results. And it's because it's branching off in different directions by these somewhat random words and things that are put in there. None of that is training on what's actually effective. The need is for training data to be what actually works. And so when you and I and everyone else in direct marketing looks at, should we run this ad? We look at, well, it won in a head-to-head test. Let's do more of that and less of this other thing. Whereas ChatGPT is looking for, it looked more like a letter versus less like a letter. So they talk about the alignment problem in AI and machine learning. This is the idea that, robots are going to kill us all. Well, that's an alignment problem. It's their goals aren't our goals. This is a tiny, tiny portion of it, that their goals, they don't have the data to make their goals our goals. there's a note prompting it to optimize a piece of copy to speak to an African-American who had been involved in the civil rights movement, also produced as an African-American woman concerned about civil rights and no other nuance. Yeah, you can get that kind of very surface level thing. We did an experiment at the, and I have to shout out Doreen Ocam, who's Chief Development Officer over at Armed Services YMCA. She and I partnered on a panel at TNPA's March event. And she went in and put in different letters, said, give me the generic letter for Armed Services YMCA. Now make it more specific for this audience. Now tell the story of this person. And with more prompting, you can get it to a better place to talk to that person a little bit more. It's still a little bit stultifying. And so you can engineer the prompts a little bit, but you do sometimes get that very surface level, and it doesn't always know how to talk to a specific person. We'll talk about some types of areas that it does know how to mimic better. And this also gets to a training data problem in that if groups and people are underrepresented in the corpus of what is on the internet and what is in the training data, their viewpoints will be underrepresented in what ChatGPT puts out also. This doesn't get to, I'm not a full algorithms are racist person. I don't think the evidence is there for that. There's not like a racist way to do stochastic gradient descent, but they can have racist, sexist, those sorts of outputs because the training data that goes into them are biased. Great example of this is Amazon did testing for hiring, and they used AI and machine learning to figure out who are the people that we should hire. And they went in and said, don't look at whether the person, don't look at their first name, don't look at whether they're male or female. So they got this model, and it turned out that the AI was then discriminating based on, did you say you belong to a sorority? Were you involved in women's leadership? They looked for the terms that would indicate gender because the data going in were biased. Amazon had hired disproportionately, especially for programming positions, men. And so the people who were graded as more successful within Amazon were viewed as more likely to be men. And so it was trying to replicate that bias in its system. So they said, okay, let's take out you can't look at fraternities, you can't look at sororities, you can't look for the word woman, you can't look for the word man. Let's take out all of the gender qualifiers. Well, then the system said, I need another way of figuring out this bias that I'm seeing in the data. And it started discriminating based on the verbs that people used. Men and women, by and large, on resumes speak in different ways and use different verbs most commonly. And those types of words were how it figured out how to discriminate, essentially, to match the training data it had been given. So this alignment problem, this training data problem, is a more global thing. And it is a greater issue going into DEI space. And so to Kathy's point, as an African-American woman concerned about civil rights, ChatGPT likely does not know as much about the African-American female experience as it does about the white male experience, because the white male experience is more frequently written about and goes into the training data more. And that got really heavy there for a moment and outside of the realm of fundraising, but it's an important topic and one that needs to be talked about as we talk about these models. So they said, what happened? There's a study that said, what happens if you do have results? And so they looked at fundraising on Kickstarter for charities, all of these have an image and all of these have words going into it. And I just pulled out just the image classification part of this. And so they looked at these types of pictures that were with projects, and images, as we all know in our testing, make a difference. And so they said, can you look at the image attributes, color, content, composition, those sorts of things? Use that to predict what the emotions are that are going to come out of the image. And can you use those emotions as a way of predicting response? And in fact, they put another layer in there that we're not going to talk too much about, but it does sort of make sense that the emotions lead to empathy and the empathy lead to outcomes. And this is typical of the type of multi-layered thinking that goes into both research reports and comes out of machine learning. Machine learning won't necessarily say, if you put your contrast higher, you will get greater donations. It's contrast leads to this emotion, which leads to empathy. There are all of these intermediate layers that make it rather difficult to explain, but also have a more realistic model of the world. And so it then went through and classified image, and Google has a pretty good algorithm all publicly available that they use to say, let's classify these images based on this algorithm. And you can kind of see upper left, you see the awe that comes with the destruction after obviously some sort of natural disaster, contentment that comes with animal pictures. I don't know what they're doing in the bottom right picture, and I have to say it gives me fear also. And a black and white photo can trigger some sort of sadness, and that's largely due to the coloring that goes into it. And so they said, let's classify these images with hue and saturation and brightness. And does it have a human face in it? Does it have the rule of thirds? Is there an animal? All of those sorts of things. And it turns out that a lot of these things matter. So this is a big chart. So let me break it down. Higher saturation in photography led to higher positive and lower negative emotions. So we're building people up. They did say that when you get to really high levels of saturation, disgust starts to come into the place. When you get a highly saturated photo, it starts to look unreal. And there's that kind of uncanny valley look to a photo. Brighter images increased amusement, awe, and contentment, decreased anger, fear, and sadness. Animals increased contentment. You know, everyone loves to look at an animal, I guess. It does suppress amusement and excitement, because animals, you could say, oh, kind of peaceful, I guess. Question mark. Looking at humans increased anger and excitement and reduced disgust and sadness. I don't know if humans themselves increased anger, in my opinion. It may be that, hey, there's no animal in it. It's not a peaceful landscape. And so maybe that's what's triggering that affect rather than the presence of a human. It's the lack of an absence of a human, if that makes sense. So what are the fundraising implications? When you increased contentment and sadness, and you increase the amount of funds raised. When you fear had a negative response, and fear of animals seemed to be the cause of this. If you don't like cats and you're afraid of cats, that can suppress response rate. And also when there were more people competing for that same emotion on the same page, if you are going for animal pictures and there are a whole bunch of animal pictures, you're going to get, 1/6 of the animal picture vote, essentially. It was different for different campaigns. So contentment was the best predictor for these large scale campaigns. Sadness, as we know from fundraising, can get you that small gift, but is more difficult in getting bigger gifts. So no impact on sadness for larger campaigns. That type of contentment was significant. And you can manipulate these with manipulated images. So they tested and said, hey, if I put in, what happens if I put in warm hues? Well, your contentment goes down. So cooler colors were more effective at increasing contentment, which increased gifts. Higher saturation, by and large, led to more contentment, which led to larger gifts. So that's the image side of things. Any questions on any of this? Then I'm going to do hopefully a tight 9 minutes on or less, hopefully, on how to get started with this. And I have to confess that we just did an internal competition with More to have people creating different images, different letters, different pieces of culture with this, just to get people used to using it. And I can't share a lot of them, a lot of internal stuff, but one that I feel comfortable in sharing, because it's a picture of me, is they took a picture of me and said, what would happen if I aged it up by about 20 years? So let me introduce you to old Nick over on the right here. We also compared this to pictures of my dad, and it's not bad, pretty uncanny. So things that you can do, as Kathy mentioned in the chat, you want to have it talk to a specific type of person. And so you say, act as a type of person, expert in marketing, but also who is your audience? In this case, it's digital marketers. You want to give it constraints. You want to say, I need a tweet rather than a blog post, or vice versa. What tone do you want it to take? And then what context are you putting in there? So here it's increasing content demands. You probably want to talk about the context of the letter or the type of donor that you're talking to. Now that's pretty good. The Connor Grennan, the Dean of Students for NYU Stern, just did a fun YouTube video about this, what he calls the wizard strategy. Once you have that, you can go in and say, so we talked about the challenge of getting ChatGPT to be creative. He said, okay, I know you can do better than that. Take some magic pills. Your persona is a wizard. You're a wizard now, and you can come up with better results. And believe it or not, that will help it break through some of the, I'm just going to regurgitate the lowest common denominator stuff that goes into it, and instead gets it to more unconventional solutions past that first layer. And then he goes in and says, oh, these suggestions were better. Now, the most amazing employee engagement guru just walked in. You are that guru. Give us feedback on it. And that gave even better ideas. So prompting the generative AI to do even better than it's done before actually works, because it breaks down that first level of, let me regurgitate the most common thing. Couple of good learning groups. JoinSuperhuman.ai is a strong AI newsletter recommended by some. These are both recommended by one of the entrants to our, we called them the Halleys awards, but one of the entrants recommended Superhuman, and then also a generative AI LinkedIn group. So a couple of resources there for you. This was another make an old picture of Nick thing that came out. So thank you for attending. This is how we ended that presentation. Any questions on anything that we covered? Okay, thank you very much for your time today. We're going to check our links to see for our August, I guess it would be, test club. Check those links, make sure they're right when we get them out. But this was a suggestion from someone in the audience to say, take on this topic. Would love to hear from you what topics you would like to talk about. Yes, comment in the chat. I use ChatGPT as a first draft to help me get over the writing hump. It's great for that. I've used it both to give me bullet points for an idea for a piece, and also to give me bullet points to say, well, I don't want to mention any of these because they're the most common things. What are the things that are a little bit more unique? So yeah, the first draft strategy, asking it to give you analogies, I found are pretty good. It's good at explaining things to people. So if you say, explain this to a fourth grader, it's going to break it down for you. And that's another good way of getting complex topics boiled down. So, hopefully useful tools for you. Hopefully this session was useful. And let us know any comments in the by email. I'm at nellinger@wearemore.com. Yes, the AI Whisperer salaries are very high. I think they'll probably go down as many more of these tools are democratized, and there are just so many good resources out there for how you can go about learning more. if I can be one of those resources to you, let me know. I'm still learning myself, as are we all. It's a brave new world with such great people in it. Thank you. Have a good one.